I tore my knee up, and Dr. Andrews thought that I was never going to wrestle again. He said I'd never seen this much damage at one time over years, but I tore my IT band, I tore my patellar tendon, broke my kneecap in half, and tore my PCL all at the same time.
I only feared him. That's what Mark Henry said about one man in professional wrestling. But here's the thing. Mark Henry is the world's strongest man. He holds world records in powerlifting that still stand today. He competed in 2 Olympic Games representing the United States. He can bend steel bars with his bare hands like they're made of clay. He can pull tractor trailers across parking lots using nothing but a harness and his legs. He lifted the Thomas Inch dumbbell, a piece of iron that almost no human being on earth can even grip properly, let alone press over their head. The handle is 2.38 inches in diameter. That might not sound like much, but try wrapping your hand around something that thick and then lifting 172 pounds with it. Most elite strongmen can't do it. Mark Henry did it. So when a man like that, a man who has proven beyond any doubt that he is one of the strongest human beings to ever walk the earth, admits that he was afraid of someone, you need to stop and pay very close attention. Because fear for Mark Henry wasn't about losing a scripted match on Monday Night Raw. It wasn't about being embarrassed in front of millions of viewers. It was about something much more primal. It was about survival. It was about knowing that some men in the locker room could hurt you badly or end your career with one wrong move, or even kill you if a situation went sideways. And Mark Henry made a list. 10 wrestlers, 10 men who made him walk on eggshells every single day, 10 men who scared the world's strongest man to his core. Number 10, The Big Show. Paul White, 7 feet tall, somewhere between 400 and 500 pounds depending on the year. Mark Henry is a giant himself. He stands 6 foot 4 inches tall. He weighs over 360 pounds of solid muscle and bone. He is used to being the biggest person in any room he walks into. But when he stood next to Big Show, something happened that almost never happened to Mark Henry in his entire life. He had to look up. Think about that for a second. For his entire existence, from childhood through his Olympic career and into professional wrestling, Mark Henry looked down at people. He was always taller, always bigger, always more physically imposing. But Big Show changed that dynamic completely, and it messed with his head in ways that are hard to describe. Henry said in multiple interviews that working with Big Show was genuinely terrifying. Not because Show was violent or mean-spirited, but because of the sheer physical toll it took on his body. Every single time he had to lift Big Show for a move, he worried about his spine. He worried about herniating a disc in his lower back. He worried about his vertebrae compressing under the weight. He worried about his back simply breaking in half. Big Show could crush you just by falling on you incorrectly, and Henry knew that better than anyone. He had to use every single ounce of his world record breaking strength just to move Big Show around the ring safely. It wasn't a matter of technique or skill. It was pure survival. And if something went wrong, if his body failed him for even a fraction of a second, Big Show's weight could paralyze him or cripple him for life. The psychological weight of working with Show was constant. Henry would lie awake the night before matches running through scenarios in his head. What if Show lost his balance during a slam? What if Henry's grip slipped? What if his knees buckled? These weren't irrational fears. They were legitimate concerns based on the physics of lifting a 7-foot-tall, 500-pound human being. Henry said that he had to conquer this specific fear during his Hall of Pain character run in 2011. He beat Big Show decisively in their feud. He dominated him. He hit him with the world's strongest slam, which required Henry to deadlift over 500 pounds of human being and drive him into the mat. And only after he did that, only after he proved to himself that he could handle Big Show's mass without his body breaking down, did he feel like he had truly become the monster character he was supposed to be. But the fear never fully went away. Every time he saw Big Show backstage, he remembered what it felt like to look up instead of down. He remembered the strain on his lower back. He remembered feeling small. Number 9, Danny Hodge. Most wrestling fans under the age of 40 have probably never even heard the name Danny Hodge. But Mark Henry knows exactly who he is, and Henry is absolutely terrified of him. Danny Hodge was a professional wrestler who competed primarily in the 1950s and 1960s. He was a 3-time NCAA wrestling champion at the University of Oklahoma. He was an Olympic boxer who represented the United States. But none of that is why Mark Henry feared him. None of those accomplishments mattered in the context of why Hodge appears on this list. Henry feared Danny Hodge because of his grip strength, specifically because Danny Hodge had the strongest grip in the entire history of professional wrestling, maybe the strongest grip of any human being who has ever lived. He could take an apple in one hand and crush it down into liquid applesauce. Not just squeeze it, not just bruise it, he could completely destroy its internal structure until it was mush. He could take a pair of steel pliers, the kind mechanics use, and break them in half just by squeezing the handles together with one hand. People said that he had double tendons in his hands and forearms. That's almost certainly not medically accurate, but it didn't matter whether it was true or not. The results were undeniable and terrifying. Hodge was what old-school wrestlers called a hooker. That's a technical term from the carnival days of wrestling. It means he could legitimately hurt you with submission holds. He knew how to manipulate joints. He knew how to apply pressure to tendons and ligaments in ways that caused unbearable pain. He knew the human body like a mechanic knows an engine. And here's the thing that made this especially frightening for Mark Henry. Danny Hodge was a junior heavyweight. He weighed about 220 pounds at his peak. Mark Henry could bench press Danny Hodge for repetitions without breaking a sweat. But Henry knew that if Hodge got his hands on his wrist, or grabbed his fingers, or locked onto his forearm, there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. All of Henry's world record strength would be completely useless against a man who could break bones with his grip. Henry said in an interview that Hodge could torture people. Those were his exact words. He could torture you. And for a man like Mark Henry, who built his entire identity and career on being physically dominant and unstoppable, the idea of being controlled and hurt by a man half his size was absolutely humiliating. That's what scared him. Not that Danny Hodge would beat him in a fight, but that Hodge would make him look weak, that Hodge would make him scream in pain, that Hodge would expose the truth that strength without technique is just mass waiting to be manipulated. Henry respected the old-timers. He understood that they came from an era where you had to be able to really fight, and Danny Hodge represented that era better than almost anyone. The fear was rooted in respect, but it was fear nonetheless. Number 8, Scott Steiner, Big Papa Pump, the man with the largest arms in the history of professional wrestling. Scott Steiner was a legitimate NCAA wrestling standout at the University of Michigan. He was a real amateur athlete with real credentials. He wasn't just a bodybuilder playing wrestler, but that's not why Mark Henry feared him. Henry feared Scott Steiner because he was wildly unpredictable and incredibly dangerous inside the ring. Steiner worked what wrestlers call stiff. That means he hit people for real. He didn't pull his punches. He didn't soften his strikes. When he chopped you in the chest, you felt it for days. When he threw suplexes, he launched people with maximum velocity, and he didn't particularly care whether his opponent landed safely or broke their neck. He was reckless, and he had a violent temper that could explode at any moment over anything. Henry has said in multiple interviews that he actively avoided working with the Steiner brothers. He straight up refused to get in the ring with them. He said, "I didn't work with them." That's not a small statement. That's not a casual preference. That's the world's strongest man admitting that he was afraid of getting hurt, not in a fight backstage, but in a scripted wrestling match. Steiner could drop you directly on your head, either by accident or on purpose, and you wouldn't know which until you were already paralyzed. Henry valued his career. He valued his health and his ability to walk. And he knew that one bad suplex from Scott Steiner, one reckless throw where Steiner didn't protect him, could end absolutely everything he had worked for. So he stayed as far away from Scott Steiner as possible. And that's a very specific kind of fear. That's recognizing that some people are simply too dangerous to be around, even in a controlled environment. That's understanding that your safety depends on other people's competence and care, and Scott Steiner had neither. The Steiner brothers had a reputation for hazing younger wrestlers. They would work extra stiff with people they didn't respect, and Henry, despite his size and strength, wanted no part of that. He watched what happened to other wrestlers who got in the ring with Scott Steiner. He saw the injuries. He saw the concussions. He saw careers shorten, and he made the smart decision to avoid that fate entirely. Some people might call that cowardice. Henry called it survival. Number 7, the Barbarian. His real name is Sione Velahi. The Barbarian was a Tongan professional wrestler who worked in the WWE and WCW during the 1980s and 1990s. He was one half of the tag team known as the Powers of Pain alongside the Warlord. Later, he teamed with Haku to form the Faces of Fear, and that partnership is extremely important to understanding why Mark Henry feared him, because the Barbarian was one of the extremely few men in wrestling history who could legitimately rival Mark Henry's raw physical strength. Henry said in interviews that the Barbarian could bench press and curl weights that were directly comparable to his own numbers. Think about how insane that statement is. Mark Henry is one of the strongest human beings to ever live. He holds world records, and the Barbarian was keeping pace with him in the gym. Henry called it Islander strength. He said that Tongans and Samoans possessed a type of functional power that defied normal human biology. They could lift absolutely massive weights. They had bone density that made them nearly indestructible. They could take punishment that would hospitalize a normal person and just shake it off. Henry respected the Barbarian deeply because he couldn't physically overpower him. In a business where Henry was completely accustomed to being the strongest guy in every single lockup and collar and elbow tie-up, the Barbarian was a variable he he couldn't control, and that made him extremely nervous. The Barbarian was also very quiet. He didn't talk much. He didn't cause backstage drama. He kept to himself. But everyone in the locker room knew not to mess with him under any circumstances, because he was part of the Tongan wrestling fraternity, and that meant if you disrespected the Barbarian, you might have to answer to Haku. And absolutely nobody in their right mind wanted that to happen. The fear Henry had of the Barbarian was the fear of meeting an equal. Henry had spent his entire life being the strongest person anywhere he went, but the Barbarian challenged that. And for someone whose entire identity was built on strength, that was deeply unsettling. It forced Henry to reckon with the possibility that maybe he wasn't as special as he thought. Maybe there were others out there who could match him, and that realization was terrifying in its own way. Number 6, Harley Race. Harley Race was the king of professional wrestling during the 1970s and early 1980s. He was the NWA World Heavyweight Champion multiple times. He defended that championship belt in territories all across North America. And in those days, defending the title meant you sometimes had to fight for real. Wrestling fans didn't all know that the matches were predetermined. Some of them thought it was a legitimate sport. So if some drunk tough guy in the crowd challenged the world champion, the champion had to be able to actually fight. Harley Race could fight. He was a technical hooker. He knew painful submission holds. He knew how to break arms and snap legs. But that's not the primary thing that scared Mark Henry about Harley Race. What really scared Henry was Race's legendary temper and the widely known fact that Harley Race traveled everywhere with a loaded gun. Multiple wrestlers from that era have confirmed this in shoot interviews. Harley Race carried a firearm, and he was absolutely not afraid to use it if a situation escalated beyond his control. Henry said that Race had a notoriously short fuse. He said that Race had an aura of intense competitiveness that made everyone around him walk on eggshells constantly. Henry made sure to always be respectful around Harley Race. He never talked back to him. He never disrespected him. He never gave Race any reason to get angry with him, because he knew that if things escalated, Race wouldn't just throw punches or lock in a submission hold. He would go much, much further than that. And for a young Mark Henry, fresh out of the Olympics and new to the wrestling business, that was genuinely terrifying. Harley Race represented an older, more violent world, a world where wrestling was still directly connected to actual violence and lawlessness and danger. Race came from an era where wrestlers fought fans in parking lots, where they had to fight local tough guys to protect the business, where carrying a weapon was just common sense. And Henry respected that history, but he also feared it deeply. Race was from a generation that didn't play games. They didn't have guaranteed contracts or health insurance. They lived and died by their toughness. And Race had survived decades in that world. That alone commanded respect and fear. Number 5, Bad News Brown. His real name was Alan Coge. Bad News Brown was an Olympic bronze medalist in judo at the 1976 Olympics in Montreal. He was the first and only American heavyweight to win an Olympic medal in judo at that time. That fact alone should tell you exactly how dangerous this man was in a real fight. But it's not just his world-class judo skills that scared Mark Henry. It's his entire attitude and approach to life. Bad News Brown was a loner in the wrestling business. He didn't play political games. He didn't kiss up to promoters or bookers. He didn't suck up to main event stars. And he absolutely did not take disrespect from anyone, regardless of their size or status. There's an extremely famous story about Bad News Brown and Andre the Giant that perfectly illustrates why Henry feared him. They were on a bus tour together, either in Japan or Canada, depending on who's telling the story. Andre the Giant, who was drunk, made some kind of racist comment. Bad News Brown stood up and stopped the entire bus. He challenged Andre to get off the bus and fight him right there on the side of the road. And Andre the Giant, who was feared by literally everyone else in the wrestling business, backed down completely. He apologized to Bad News Brown. Mark Henry heard that story early in his career, and it fundamentally changed how he viewed Bad News Brown. Because Andre the Giant was an absolute colossus. He was 7 foot 4 inches tall and weighed well over 500 pounds. He was the biggest professional wrestler who had ever lived. And yet, a man who weighed about 270 pounds and knew Olympic-level judo techniques made Andre back down without throwing a single punch. Henry understood the implications immediately. He knew that Brown could use leverage and joint manipulation and throwing techniques to absolutely cripple a man who was twice his size. And Henry had zero interest in testing that theory personally. He said in an interview, "I've never heard of anyone messing with him, but that might be because no one was quite stupid enough to try it. That's fear wrapped up very carefully in professional respect. Bad News Brown didn't need to prove himself. His reputation did all the work, and Henry was smart enough to recognize that some men are better left alone. Brown had nothing to prove and everything to lose, and that made him more dangerous than someone who was trying to build a reputation. Brown's judo background meant he understood leverage in ways that powerlifters like Henry never would. Henry could lift enormous weights in a straight line, but Brown could redirect that force and use it against him. That's what made him so terrifying. Number 4, The Undertaker. Mark Calloway, the dead man, the phenom. The Undertaker is one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time and a first-ballot Hall of Famer. But Mark Henry didn't fear him because of his wrestling ability or his character work. He feared The Undertaker because of his massive institutional power within the WWE locker room. The Undertaker was the unquestioned locker room leader for over 2 decades. He ran something called Wrestler's Court, which was a backstage tribunal system where disputes between wrestlers were settled and punishments were handed out for violations of locker room etiquette. The Undertaker served as the judge in these proceedings, and if you were called to Wrestler's Court, you were in serious trouble. The punishments weren't usually physical, they were social and financial. You might be forced to buy beer and food for the entire roster out of your own pocket, or you might be socially ostracized and blackballed, which for a young wrestler trying to establish a career in the WWE was essentially a death sentence. Henry said in multiple interviews that The Undertaker was a benevolent king. He was generally fair and reasonable, but he had a very strict code of conduct and respect, and if you violated that code, you were going to pay a price. Henry was absolutely terrified of disappointing The Undertaker. He said that Taker had a ritual where he would shake everyone's hand when he walked into the arena or the locker room. It was a sign of mutual respect among professionals, and if you didn't shake his hand back properly, or if you did something that he considered disrespectful to the business, you were finished. Henry also had a major professional encounter with The Undertaker at WrestleMania 22, where they competed in a casket match. Henry viewed that match as an enormous test of his abilities and his professionalism. The Undertaker was the absolute franchise player of the entire WWE company. He usually worked his best matches with smaller, more agile, more athletic wrestlers who could keep up with his pace. For him to agree to work a big specialty match with a super heavyweight like Mark Henry was a massive sign of trust and respect. And Henry was terrified of violating that trust. He was scared of accidentally injuring The Undertaker during the match. He was scared of having a bad match that would make them both look foolish. He was scared of letting down the most important wrestler in the company. That psychological pressure cooked Henry into becoming a much better performer. It eventually led directly to his incredibly successful Hall of Pain character run years later. But during that time period, the fear was very real, because this wasn't fear of physical violence. This was the fear of professional failure. This was the fear of not being good enough to live up to the expectations of a legend. And that's a completely different kind of fear that cuts much deeper. The Undertaker represented the conscience of the WWE locker room. He was the standard. He was the measuring stick. And Henry knew that if he failed in Taker's eyes, it didn't matter what anyone else thought. His career would be over. Number 3, Ron Simmons, Farouk. Ron Simmons was the leader of the Nation of Domination faction in the late 1990s. Mark Henry was a young, inexperienced member of that stable, and Simmons served as his mentor and his guide in the wrestling business. But he was also the only man that Henry ever truly feared on a deep personal level, not because Simmons would kill him or maim him, but because Simmons would correct him. And that correction could be physical, verbal, or both. Henry has said in multiple shoot interviews that Ron Simmons may be the only human being on the entire planet that you might be genuinely a little bit afraid of. And he absolutely meant every word of that statement. Henry was very young and very brash and very arrogant when he first entered the WWE. He would eyeball other wrestlers to try to intimidate them. He would act tough and cocky, and Ron Simmons would shut that behavior down immediately and decisively. Henry said that Ron Simmons was the only person he ever thought about fighting in a premeditated way. He said everything was premeditated. That's an enormous admission. Henry usually reacted to situations with pure instinct and physical confidence. But with Ron Simmons, he had to actually plan and strategize. He had to game out scenarios in his head. And ultimately, he came to the realization that the cost of any conflict with Simmons was far too high to ever be worth it. Ron Simmons was known throughout the wrestling business to physically basically receipt wrestlers who were unsafe or disrespectful. That's a wrestling term. It means he would hit them back for real to teach them a lesson. Henry personally watched Simmons do exactly this to Ahmed Johnson. Ahmed Johnson was an absolutely massive, heavily muscled wrestler who had a terrible reputation for being reckless and dangerous in the ring. He injured Ron Simmons during a match through his carelessness. Instead of complaining to management or making a scene, Simmons simply waited patiently. And the very next time they were scheduled to be in the ring together, Simmons methodically straightened Ahmed Johnson out with stiff, extremely legitimate strikes and throws. Henry saw that happen with his own eyes, and he learned an incredibly important lesson. He learned that Ron Simmons was the ultimate arbiter of justice in the WWE locker room, and Henry was absolutely terrified of becoming the target of that justice himself. But it wasn't just physical fear. It was much deeper than that. It was the idea of disappointing a man he deeply respected and admired. Ron Simmons was a trailblazer and a standard bearer for black wrestlers in the WWE and in wrestling generally. He was the first black WCW World Heavyweight Champion in history, and Henry desperately wanted to live up to that legacy and make Simmons proud of him. The fear of letting Ron Simmons down, the fear of being a disappointment to him, shaped Henry's entire career trajectory and his approach to the wrestling business. Simmons represented everything Henry wanted to become. He was respected. He was tough. He commanded authority without having to constantly prove himself. And Henry knew that the only way to earn that same respect was to follow Simmons' example. But that also meant living with the constant fear of falling short. Number 2, Brock Lesnar, the next big thing, the beast incarnate. Brock Lesnar is an absolute freak of nature, and Mark Henry has said this in countless interviews. Lesnar is 6 foot 3 inches tall and weighs around 285 pounds of pure muscle, but he moves like a cruiserweight. He has the agility and speed of someone half his size. He was the NCAA heavyweight wrestling champion. He later became the UFC heavyweight champion. He is legitimately one of the most dangerous human beings on the entire planet, and Mark Henry is genuinely terrified of him. Henry's fear of Brock Lesnar is rooted specifically in unpredictability and kinetic chaos. Back in 2002, a rookie Brock Lesnar executed a perfect overhead belly-to-belly suplex on Mark Henry during a match. Keep in mind that Henry weighs between 360 and 400 pounds depending on the time period. To throw a man that size completely over your head and land him on his back requires absolutely insane strength combined with flawless technique. And Lesnar did it seemingly effortlessly, like he was tossing a bag of laundry. Henry said that experience completely shattered his sense of physical invulnerability. For the first time in his entire life, he felt small. He felt like a child being tossed around by an adult, and it scared him on a primal level. Henry has also said in interviews that Brock Lesnar is very, very dangerous to work with in the ring. Lesnar works stiff, he moves explosively fast, and he genuinely doesn't care if you get hurt in the process. Henry constantly worried that one single mistake during a match with Lesnar would result in a catastrophic career-ending injury. Or even worse, it would escalate into a legitimate shoot fight, and Henry knew he was absolutely not prepared to fight someone with Lesnar's legitimate mixed martial arts skills. Because Lesnar isn't just playing tough. He's not a character. He legitimately could kill someone with his bare hands if he chose to do so. Henry also said that Lesnar is deeply antisocial and has no filter whatsoever. He said, and I'm quoting here, he might hit somebody or cuss a little kid out. That's fear of association and proximity. Henry didn't want to be anywhere near Brock Lesnar because Lesnar was a constant liability. He could bring negative attention and heat onto anyone who was associated with him, and Henry valued his job and his income and his physical safety far too much to risk any of that. But even beyond all of that, the fear never went away. Henry said, "Every day I fear that I did something wrong, and he knows about it." Read that sentence again. That's a man living in constant low-level anxiety. That's a man who knows deep in his soul that he's completely outmatched and there's nothing he can do about it. Lesnar represented a new breed of wrestler. He wasn't from the old-school territory system. He didn't pay his dues the traditional way. He came in with legitimate combat credentials, and the WWE had to build around him. And for veterans like Henry, that was disorienting. Lesnar didn't respect the old hierarchies. He didn't care about backstage politics. He was there to fight and get paid, and that unpredictability made him more dangerous than someone playing by the traditional rules. Number 1, Haku, known as Meng in WCW, real name Tonga Fafita, the single toughest man to ever step foot inside a professional wrestling ring. Mark Henry has said repeatedly and unambiguously that Haku is the one man he would pick above absolutely everyone else to back him up in a real bar fight. Not Brock Lesnar, not Big Show, not Ron Simmons, Not any of the other 9 men on this list. Haku. And that's because Haku is not bound by the normal rules of civilization or human behavior. Haku is a living weapon. Henry's fear of Haku is rooted entirely in lethal intent and superhuman pain tolerance. Haku is famous, or perhaps infamous is the better word, for biting a man's nose completely off his face during a bar fight. He is famous for allegedly snapping police handcuffs during an arrest by flexing his wrists and breaking the steel. These stories are not exaggerated folklore. They are not tall tales. They have been corroborated and confirmed by multiple wrestlers, including Bret Hart and Chris Jericho, and others who were there and saw these things happen. For Mark Henry, a man who literally bends steel bars for a living as part of his strongman demonstrations, to respect and fear another man's ability to break steel restraints is extraordinarily significant. It means that Haku can access a level of strength that defies all normal human limitations. It's what psychologists call hysterical strength. It's the strength of a man who feels absolutely no pain and has zero fear of death or consequences. Henry has also said, and this is crucial to understanding the psychology, that Haku is one of the nicest, kindest, most gentle human beings in the world under normal circumstances. He's a pussycat, he's polite, he's friendly, but he has a trigger somewhere inside him, and absolutely nobody knows what that trigger is or what will set it off. That's what made the locker room environment absolutely terrifying for everyone. You were constantly walking on eggshells around Haku. You never wanted to be the person who accidentally set him off, because if you did, you weren't getting into a normal fist fight. You weren't going to trade punches and then shake hands afterward. You were going to get maimed. You were going to lose body parts. Henry said that Haku's mere presence in the locker room prevented all bullying and hazing. No one, not even absolute giants like Big Show or Mark Henry himself, would dare cause any kind of scene or problem if Haku was in the building, because everyone feared waking the dragon, and that is the ultimate form of respect in professional wrestling. It's peace maintained through superior firepower. Haku never had to actually prove himself or hurt anyone. His reputation alone was enough to keep perfect order. And Mark Henry, the world's strongest man, lived every single day in fear of somehow disappointing him or making him angry. The stories about Haku go beyond just the nose-biting incident. There are reports of him fighting multiple bouncers at once and winning. There are stories of him being tasered by police and it having no effect on him. There are accounts of him throwing full-grown men through plate glass windows. And all of these stories come from credible sources. Multiple wrestlers who worked with him for years. These aren't internet rumors. These are documented incidents that happened in front of witnesses. And Henry knew all of these stories. He heard them from the people who were there, and it shaped how he viewed Haku. Henry understood that Haku operated on a completely different level. He wasn't just tough. He was something beyond human. He had a pain threshold that defied medical explanation. He had a capacity for violence that scared even the toughest men in a business built on toughness. And Henry wanted absolutely no part of ever being on the receiving end of that violence. So what does all of this tell us about Mark Henry as a person and as a performer? It reveals something profound. It tells us that raw strength is absolutely not the same thing as toughness. Mark Henry could lift more weight than any of these 10 men. He has world records that prove it. But he knew, deep in his soul, that in a real fight where there are no rules, weight doesn't matter nearly as much as people think. Technique matters. Intent matters. The willingness to go further than the other person matters. Pain tolerance matters. And all 10 of these men possessed something that Henry didn't naturally have. They had the willingness to cross lines. They had the ability to operate completely outside normal social rules. And Henry respected that. But more importantly, he learned from it. Because when Mark Henry finally ascended to become a legitimate main event level wrestler during his Hall of Pain character run that started in 2011, he wasn't playing the world's strongest man anymore. He was playing the silverback. He was the monster that everyone else feared, and he achieved that transformation by carefully synthesizing and absorbing the specific traits of the men who had scared him most. He adopted the explosive aggression of Haku. He adopted the stern, no-nonsense demeanor of Ron Simmons. He adopted the unpredictable violence of Brock Lesnar. He adopted the quiet entitlement and authority of Harley Race. He became exactly what he had once feared most, and that's the ultimate lesson here. Fear is not weakness. Fear is information. Fear tells you what you need to learn and absorb in order to survive. And Mark Henry survived everything. He retired as a WWE Hall of Famer. He retired as a deeply respected veteran. He retired as a man that younger wrestlers like Braun Strowman and Jade Cargill actively seek out for mentorship and advice. He became the mentor. He became the father figure. He became the one who delivers corrections when necessary. And all of it started with fear, because the men who scared Mark Henry taught him what it truly means to be dangerous in professional wrestling. They taught him that strength alone is never enough. You absolutely must have respect. You must have discipline. You must have the proven ability to make other people walk on eggshells around you. And Mark Henry learned every single one of those lessons perfectly. He watched how Haku commanded respect without ever having to ask for it. He watched how Ron Simmons corrected behavior without ever losing his cool. He watched how The Undertaker maintained order through institutional power. He watched how Brock Lesnar moved through the world without caring what anyone thought. And he synthesized all of those lessons into his own persona. The Hall of Pain era. Mark Henry was the culmination of everything he had learned from the men who scared him. He became the enforcer. He became the standard bearer. He became the man that younger wrestlers feared disappointing. And that transformation from the scared rookie to the feared veteran is one of the most remarkable character arcs in professional wrestling history. So the next time someone asks who the toughest wrestler of all time really is, remember this story. Remember that even the world's strongest man, a verified physical anomaly who holds world records that may never be broken, had a list of 10 men who made him afraid. And that fear didn't make him weak. That fear made him stronger. That fear made him smarter. That fear made him legendary. Because Mark Henry understood something that most people never learn. The strongest people aren't the ones who never feel fear. The strongest people are the ones who feel fear and learn from it anyway.